All right, so as I said, welcome everybody to Unit 3, Advanced Web Apps, and the first sprint of Unit 3. As I started to go into before, when we opened up things a little bit early, I think one of the main differences about this unit and the units that you've done before is that, like before you were learning skills, you were learning JavaScript, you were learning HTML, some basics of React and then component-based architecture. In this unit, you'll be building web applications. Right? Kind of the goal of this entire unit is to get you to a place where you're building CRUD applications. So it's basically, there's some backend that holds a resource that could be, cars or products or to-dos as you'll be working with today. You'll be making API calls to get that data, bring it back, do manipulations on it, things like that. And instead of your applications being like 1 or 2 files, you'll have 5 or 6 or 10 different files that are interacting with each other in order to create one working application. We're definitely going to try to tie this in to a real working environment as much as possible in going through this. And so, yeah, it's difficult. There's definitely, there's a step up in this one, but it's all extremely practical stuff. So I hope that you enjoy it. Starting off, let me just introduce myself. So my name is Warren C. Longmire. I am the lead instructor for this unit, and I'm actually your only instructor for this unit. So I'm going to be taking care of all of our lectures and also our office hours for every day that we go through. A little bit about me. I've been programming for a long time. I started programming when I was about 12 years old. And was always into games, was always into video games and was never that good at them, but always wanted to figure out how they worked. And so my first programming language was QBasic, made like a basic Space Invaders type game that I just built on for a while. Eventually went to college, got a computer science degree. I worked in video game development for quite a while. Worked at Electronic Arts and on an animated film, making tools for a good while. Ended up in educational gaming, working with a lot of research studies. That kind of led me into web technologies because most of the projects that we did were on the web, and that kind of naturally led me into full stack and front end web development specifically. All that said, I've always been really interested in education. And so I found myself always kind of coming back to teaching in one form or another. I've been with Lambda for about 9 months now. And yeah, it's great to be able to work with y'all and hope I can bring all of those skills along with you. Not the only support person that you have, Jasmine Mohammed is someone that y'all might have been introduced to in Unit 2, I'm not sure, but that is the Student Success Coordinator for Unit 3. So if there's any issues that you have at home, if you feel like you might need to have a hiatus, you just need some support that's not academic, that's not in line with the curriculum, Jasmine's your first point of contact. If you think that you might want to flex early and you want to have a conversation about that with someone who's neutral, Jasmine is the person to reach out to. Don't hesitate to use Jasmine as a resource. And they also will be having office hours specifically for those kinds of procedures. In addition to that, we also have after hours, and I think that y'all have worked with Krista before, but once again, every day in the evening and then in the morning, Krista will be having open sessions to kind of guide you through any kind of issues that you might have. So yeah, lots of different resources that are available to you. So I wanted to be able to put this all in one place. Y'all are familiar with these things, but it's nice to be able to have it like nice and clear and clean. So definitely hit up the before and after hours with Krista. So that's Monday through Friday and then Monday through Thursday. Office hours are going to happen with me every day at 1:30 p.m. And going into 2 p.m. at the latest. I can let this go as long as an hour if need be. And I very often like to bring in some extra material that might have come in the class when I do office hours. So, look out for that. Definitely, take advantage of this. It's a good place for you to kind of get your own questions out there and even do a little check of your code. Student success obviously is always available with Jasmine. We have our help channel that's available. I'll be trolling through the help channel to try to help out as much as possible. But the help channel is primarily a way that you can help each other. So, like, don't hesitate to put up a question. Don't hesitate to answer questions. It's a way that you as a unit and as a cohort can communicate with each other. But I'll definitely be there. If something is particularly hazy, feel free to tag me to make sure that I can help out there. For each of our module projects, I'm also going to be releasing videos the day after, so that you'll be able to check on what you did or see a different perspective on how to build things. And of course, we got the pulse checks, check for understandings. Please, please, please do these. This is our way of kind of keeping track of what your progress is. And in the case of the pulse checks, this is how I can know to reach out individually to students that need help. So, this is something that every day after lectures, I always check the pulse checks to see who I just DM, and we can have a little conversation about things. So if you find yourself having some trouble and you need personal attention, pulse checks is the first place to go to flag yourself that something needs adjusting. All right. So that's that. Are there any quick questions on just like resources, what you have to look forward to? You can just unmute yourselves and shout it out if you do. Going once, going twice.
I got a quick question.
Go for it.
We're on Unit 3 now.
We are on Unit 3.
Are we getting mentees? Is that a thing that's happening?
Yes, that is a thing that's happening. Yeah. So congratulations, y'all are officially experts. So you're gonna have little underlings underneath you. Yeah, there's going to be kind of like a session, like an orientation session for mentor mentees. That's also something that Jasmine will be talking to you about. So just stay tuned to the channel and you'll be getting all the information on your assignments. Good question. Last second, of course, because it always happens in the last second. Anything else? We good? All right, let's get into it because we do got a lot of information to go through today. So this is the sprint. We'll be doing class components today, React lifecycle, composing non-visual behaviors, and then testing. I really think that this unit it's a lot of review in some ways. You're gonna be learning some different ways of going at information that you've already learned in Unit 2. And so I think it's a good way of kind of like easing in. There's some stuff that's going to seem redundant, but we're going to go over the reasons why we're going through it. For today, we're going to be going into class components. So our objectives: using class components to render to the DOM, passing props between class components, state within class components, and then handling events, user input, all of that good stuff. Okay. In general, whether you're using class components, you're using functional components, which are two different ways of just making component in React. And further, even if you're working with Angular, or some of the other kinds of front-end libraries that exist, the idea of a component is something that is very strong and that is kind of like embedded in making web applications, period. No matter what language you use or what framework you use, these 5 things are always going to kind of be there. There needs to be some kind of way of creating and rendering some things to some DOM to the screen. There's going to be some kind of system for holding state. There's going to be some event handling system, a way of nesting components and passing with props. You'll always see representations of this, and no matter what component system you might be using. And so, like with that in mind, let's just go over each of these different types of systems for what we've already used for our our functional components. Just as a review, let's see, I'm just going to do watch lecture. There we go. So this should allow you to pull in using that little script that was inside of our thread to get the latest code. So feel free to watch that. If it doesn't work, which happens sometimes, just go ahead and let me know, and I'll try to fix that. But in the meantime, as a start, let's go inside of the review folder inside of the repositories that we're using today. And you should have already done an npm install. We're going to do an npm start just to see what we got here. And there we go. We got, the simplest possible application, just a little hello world, right? So as we said, what we're going to do is just go through for functional components, the things that you're used to with React, each of these different types of features and how they work, okay? So as a start, we have to actually create a component and just render something out to the screen. And so that's what we're doing right here. We've created a functional component in this case by just making a function. We're going to return whatever's going to be on the screen. This could just be a straight up text string if we wanted to. I could just return Warren. And yeah, let's do this. So at the very least, you have to have some kind of DOM that's around. So we're going to make a div, and I'm just going to put Warren in here. There we go. And let's say that it's an H1 instead. Boom. Put another name in there. I'm going to say hello. Boom. There we go. So that's all there is to it. We're going to export that out so that we have access to this component in our other files. Of course, this index.js is where the magic starts every single time. So we're going to get that app component, and then we're going to render it through our React DOM library. Okay, so once again, this is just review. Of course, right now this is a static website, right? There's no ability for it to change. So what I'm going to do is just use a variable as a first, as a start. I'm going to say we got const name. I'm going to say this is Allison. And let's say that what I want is to take name, whatever's inside of our name variable, and I want to inject that into this DOM that I'm rendering. Can someone tell me how I would do that?
Would you just use name instead of curly braces where you want to put it?
Yep. So anytime that I want to inject some code, I always use curly braces in order to take some kind of like external data and put it in there. And in this case, I just put in name. Very good. And once again, I mean, like in coding, in learning to be an engineer, being able to talk out your process and is a very important part. So we're going to be using Slack for questions and stuff like that. But very often, I'm going to prompt y'all to just unmute yourselves and shout it out. So you'll be prepared and embrace the opportunity, because being able to talk out your things will make you a much stronger programmer. So I can do that. I can do Warren instead. Bingo bongo. So this is nice. That's definitely a good start. I can just still inject things into it, but there's no real way of me changing this name variable inside of my component. I need some kind of way of making it so that name can be dynamically changed, and then we re-render our component every time that changes. So for that, we're going to need to use state, right? In the case, there's lots of different ways in which you can make state happen. We're going to use the use state hook. So for that, I'm just going to, there's going to be some kind of like response that's going to be returned. So I'm going to destructure that response. That's going to give me name in this case, and set name. And instead of Warren, I'm going to say use state. And my initial value is going to be Warren. There we go. So we got the same thing. But now in this case, I also have a way of changing that name. And that will start up our reactive process, right? It changes the value of name, re-renders our component so that we now have a different value that's displayed. And while we're at it, I'm also going to make another piece of state. I'm going to say age, set age. State, and let's say 33. Cool. Very, very nice. So there we go. That's the first two things that we need right there. We have a way of just rendering something to the screen. We have a way of rendering out dynamic data. So this is now a dynamic app. Of course, like what's the point of having state if you're not going to change it? So let's also add in some event handling here. So what I'm going to do, I'll make this a little bit bigger so that y'all can see it well, is I'm going to wrap all of this inside of a div. And we're just going to create a button. Change state. Okay, so you see that is now rendered to our screen. But it's not doing anything. We actually have to trigger. We have to capture that event, right? Can someone tell me if I wanted to catch a click on this button, what would I put inside of this component here?
On click.
On click, right? One of the many different click handlers that we have access to. So we got on click. And as a start, I can just inject an anonymous function directly in here. So I can just say set name is Allison. And say set age is 22. Change my state, and there we go. Now, of course, this is a little, it's a matter of style, kind of like whether you want to inject in anonymous functions or make event handlers. What you'll see is that very often I end up making separate event handlers because it's a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to say handle click is equal to that same function that we just had. So now every time we click, our execution jumps into our click handler and the same thing happens. So I'm refreshing my page just to reset it to the original values. Click change state and we go back in. Let's say that it's 12, just so that it's a drastic change. And that's it. Cool. And one of the things I want to hit home is that, you should be thinking of each of these different things, like the creation, holding state, handling events, as a different tool that you have. There's nothing really, everything that you do will be variations on using these same basic tools. So yeah, let's keep on moving. Next, we have component nesting, right? Let's say that I wanted this component to be a little bit more complicated. I'm going to say I'm also going to have an H3 where I say your name is a fantastic name. Never change it. Okay, so there we go. I changed the state and it goes ahead and injects my new values. But yeah, so now this is getting a little bit more complicated, right? There's a lot of different things that are happening inside of this piece of our application. So in looking at this code, it was like, yeah, this is a perfectly good time to go ahead and make a new component. You are used to always making new components inside of other files. That is definitely something you can do. But just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to create a new component right here, which is completely legal. I'm going to say we got a person. I'm going to return these two things. So we got div. Both of those go in there. And instead of that big mess of code, I'm just going to put a person in here. Okay. So now I'm trying to render it, but I am getting an error. It's saying that age is not defined. And where is age? Not, yeah, it's saying that there's a problem inside of person and age is not defined. So if I look up here, we have name, we have age, but yeah, I don't have anything in here. Can someone tell me why this error is happening?
You'd have to put a person inside the return for your app and then pass those as props through.
Yeah, so props is the biggest thing here, right? I need to have access to name and age. Name and age are defined in state in my app component. So it does not natively, it's not inside of the closure, it's not inside of the scope name and age of person. This is its own little island of data and code. So what I need to do is inside of person, I'm going to pass in name. And I'm going to pass an age. And then up here, now I'm getting props coming in. So I have to explicitly say that I want some props. I'm just going to print them out just to see that I'm actually getting what I want. And I am. It's getting Warren and 333. So now instead of name, I'm going to put in props. 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 And that's it. Get rid of this console log because we don't need it anymore. Nothing worse than having console logs that are just bouncing around. So there we go. Now we're getting the data that we're actually looking for, right? It's defined inside of our app component. You can think of this as like the top of the tree of components that we have. And then we have a subcomponent that we're passing that data into. And when I push, it goes ahead and passes. We can reset, right? We can change that name. And we pass those new values into our person component so that that's clear. Here we go. So that covers our last two. We have our nested components. We also have passing things in through props. And as we said, regardless of what you use, you'll always be using some variation of these kinds of these kinds of tools. The main thing that we are going to be going over today, because once again, this is all review, is going to take this nice, pretty concise 27-line block of code, and we're going to turn it into this almost twice as long monstrosity here, full of syntax that you probably only half understand, that does, once again, almost the exact same thing as what this does. So the obvious question that comes out of this is, why are we learning this thing that is, so, complicated and busted when we have this nice and concise version of components already, right? The answer to that actually goes to the heart of a lot of what you're going to be doing behind the scenes when you become like full-on software engineers. And it requires us to look a little bit into the history of React components and why it is that React looks the way that it does, how it's changed through time. So we're going to go through a little bit of a timeline on how like web components work. Once again, no matter where we are, we're always going to be doing these 5 different things. So first, we're going to go all the way back into 2008. Barack Obama was still president. Yeah, we went outside and played. It was a magical time. And this is before React existed. There was a really great library called jQuery that was used in order to hook up a lot of the things that you did in the beginning of Unit 2. So this is kind of like a jerry-rigged component, right? We still have the ability to render something to the screen. So that's kind of what's happening here. That's that creation phase, right? We've created a function here that kind of creates a button, like using these like arcane, like just functions that are available, puts text into that button, puts in a class. We have an event listener that's there, right? And as soon as you append, that's your rendering stage. So it's still doing a lot of the same things that the components that we're using today have, but it's up to you to code all of the different pieces. There was no standardization around it. And around 2008, that's when the applications really started to take off. And so it was clear that some kind of library, a consistent system for making these components needed to be made, right? Fast forward to 2010. This was not the first library that was used, but it's the first one that I used and was very popular. So this is backbone.js, not really in use much anymore, but you can see how it's starting to go more towards having at least a common language around how you do rendering. How do you initialize a component? We have, this on change. So that's like your event handler that's worked in a little bit of a different way using class-based components. We also have this function that allows you to render something by hand. So yeah, like this started to get towards having some kind of library that allowed you to make components that did all the things that components needed to do. There were problems with it, as always happens, with kind of like the first draft of this. And this was also during the time when, you know, like Facebook even was really starting to take off, that web development as app development was really starting to take off. So React was something that was developed through Facebook in the early, like pre-alpha version, pre-beta version was made internally just when Facebook was really dealing with the feed system. Because obviously, if you look at a Facebook feed, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of little pieces and sub pieces and things that are connected. They actually tried to use Backbone, but found it to be not very satisfactory. And so the React class-based component was born. At this point, classes actually didn't even exist inside of JavaScript. But the idea that ultimately a component was a class, it was like a template for lots of different types of instances of a component that could be put on the screen, was already something that was locked inside of the team's head. We see that we have this render function here, and the big contribution that React allowed was JSX, so that instead of doing, you know, like these weird, let's see, instead of doing like things like this, where we're using JavaScript in order to create buttons and to add stuff to it, you could just put HTML directly inside of your code, inside of your JavaScript code. Huge revelation, never been done before. And between that and the reactive process, this really made React take off as the de facto front-end language, front-end library. Moving forward into 2005, so we see we're still before the initial release, but classes were actually introduced into JavaScript. Once again, they did not exist in JavaScript by default, still don't really. But in some ways, classes were made specifically because React took off so much that it was seen that this is a paradigm for programming that needed to be in there. This is what we're going to be building today. We're going to be building components in this form. So we're going to be going back to 2015 level technology. We go into 2017 and we have our first functional component here. Is somebody, are we good? Yeah. And if I'm going too fast, something like that, feel free to just shout it out, let me know. You know, we'll handle things as they come. So we got our first functional component. Was really just made as a way of very quickly putting some stuff onto the screen without going through all of the additional syntax that's needed in order to make a class-based component. So this was you know, just a different way of doing, once again, the same things that were already being done in our class-based components. And then, you know, it was seen that, wow, these functional components are actually pretty nifty. And so in 2019, so very recently, hooks were added in that allowed for these smaller, lighter weight functional components to do things like handle state, you know, to be able to use use effect, to be able to do these life cycle methods, which will be going into more tomorrow. And also to give people the ability to make their own hooks that can do all sorts of different things inside of our functional components, which we'll be going into more on Wednesday. So this kind of brings us up to the current. This is the way that you've been learning how to use React up until this point. This is the vanguard. This is the way that React is used right now. And so once again, I mean, you might be saying, so why are we taking the time this week to go through 2015 technology if we've already learned the 2019 way? The reason for that, and this is a good general principle to hold, is that technology has a long tail, right? Even Twitter, which uses React, you know, even though 2019 was when this paradigm was brought in, it took them until like late 2020 to actually integrate this into their code. It was a good year and a half before one of the biggest web technology companies brought their stuff up to modern times. And you know, like, yeah, I mean, when it comes to somebody tell me, why do you think it might have taken so long for even a company like Twitter to like upgrade to the latest?
Because they have to transition like their entire huge code base to this new technology while keeping their old stuff functional in the meantime.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you think about it, I mean, like nobody, when this was first released, there was documentation, but nobody actually knew how to build components like this. Like, you know, Twitter and every other web technology company, they were learning all of this stuff from scratch. And so, you know, there was a learning curve just for them to understand how to build. And it's huge costs to convert like a huge code base into modern standards. So you'll actually find very often that companies that you work with will not be using the latest technology. You know, there's sometimes where it's just the cost, you know, the cost benefit doesn't go in favor of making things the latest technology. If you work with government, God forbid, you might be working on COBOL. You might be working with languages that existed in the 80s, you know? So as a programmer, it's very important for you to hold inside of your mind that it's important to be backwards compatible, to know kind of where the technology that you're using comes from, so that you can go back and understand the base of what you're doing, so that you can bring, you know, so that you can potentially kind of like bring things up for whatever company you're using. There's going to be lots of companies that make use of class-based components today. So we want to make sure that you're conversant in this way of making React components. With that, I'm going to go ahead and give us a 5-minute break. When we come back, we'll look at how to build all of the stuff that we just did inside of class components. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw those on Slido. All right, let's cycle back in. Also, for those that came in late, the attendance code is 6046. You can find that inside of chat. So feel free to grab that, go inside of Canvas, and mark yourselves as here. Boom. So a couple of quick tips and tricks before we get into the building of class-based components. First of all, functional components can do everything at this point that a class-based component can do. There's no need for you to kind of go back and to change other people's code. There have been some times in Build Week where Unit 3 students will just kind of like strip down all of the Unit 2, developers' code because they thought class components were the way to do it. That's not necessary. There are some things that are handled in a special way for class-based components, and that's primarily the lifecycle method. We're going to be going into that tomorrow. If you are in a company that still uses class-based components, typically what you'll find is that the more heavy components, so components that like use state, that have lifecycle methods, that are just like, you know, where there's a lot of subcomponents coming out of it, those will be class-based components. Things that are lighter, like all they're doing maybe is like taking props and displaying something on the screen, those will be functional. That's the way that functional components were introduced to me. And we'll go over kind of like what that looks like in our next example. But regardless, companies will definitely need for you to know both. So at the very least for you know, the next 3 days or so, try to build everything just using class-based components, just so you can start getting used to it. Class-based components are going to be sprinkled out throughout your sprint challenges and your module projects. So you know, get used to working with them, and you'll be just fine. With that, let's go ahead and start to make some class-based components. So if you could go back inside of VS Code, and what I want for y'all to do is just to make a new file inside of your source folders for review. And we're going to call this app2.js. Inside of index, what we're going to do is we're going to import in a new file. So it's going to be app2.js. from app2. And instead of loading in from app, we're going to load in from app2. Okay. Do an npm start on this. And of course, you know, nothing happens, it blows up. It's trying to create, well, if we look at our actual error here, it's saying it's trying to create something, but it's that type is invalid. It was expecting some kind of string or object and it just didn't get anything, basically. And that makes sense because at this point, this file doesn't have anything inside of it. So let's go through the process of doing that first part of just creating and rendering something to our DOM. So I'm going to, for this, import in React from React. That should be all I really need. Just going to consult my notes real quick because I am just as liable as anybody to forget some things. No, all right, good. All right, and so now let's just go ahead and make our component. So for that, I'm going to say class app2 extends React dot component. And down here, I'm just going to go ahead and do an export default, same as always, app2. Okay. Before we start digging into this, you know, class is something that you've seen probably in Unit 1, and I haven't touched since then. So I'm just going to bring Slack back over here, and I'm going to ask a question for everyone. No, it's not 60. It's not 64. If you look inside of chat, it'll be there. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put in a question mark. So what is a class? In your own words. Right, and so last I saw, I think we have about a good like 60 or so people in the class. So I definitely want to see at least like 20 answers in this. This is another opportunity for you to kind of dig into the thought process behind the code. And you know, you're going to be judged on this in your interviews of just being able to explain things just as much, if not more, than on what you're able to code. So take advantage of this to put in some kind of answer. Even if you're wrong, even if it's a guess, it's at least an opportunity. Only wrong answer is no answer. Okay, we got 6. Okay, let's at least get to like 12 and I'll start looking. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Cool. Extends a parent function. That's interesting. I mean, so extends is something that a class can do, but it doesn't necessarily have to do that. You know, we're going to go a little bit into these, what extends means in a second. Let's see, Matt says a dynamic template. I like that a lot. So the idea of a template is very important. A template for objects is also really, really great description. Whenever you're using a class, ultimately what we're trying to do is to get little bundles of data and of action, of methods, right? That represent a certain type of a certain, you know, just an abstraction of a certain type of thing. And then what a class does is it sets up the common parts of each of those objects. So you can basically just manufacture as many different objects as you want. So a dynamic template for objects, both very good. They create objects. Key. Class is a reusable bit of code that produces objects. Excellent, Devin. That's the idea that it is reusable is extremely important. It's a factory. I like that, Kazim. You know, it's a way of being able to manufacture as many different objects of the same type as you want. You can think of it as like a little machine that prints out cars or alarm clocks or whatever it may be. Template, syntactic sugar on top of an object. So this is an important point. You know, in JavaScript, as we said before, classes are not native. So there are lots of unseen things that are happening behind the scenes when you use class inside of JavaScript specifically. That said, class is something that you'll find in almost every programming language, and it always does, this basic piece of functionality. It's always a reusable bit of code that's going to create our objects. So very, very good. One more question before we dig in, and that is, what does it mean to extend? There we go. And no need to delete any of your answers. These are all good answers. They're all ways of searching for the truth. So, if something is not exactly on target, that's cool. That's part of the learning process. So what does extend mean? Okay. 9, 10, 11, 12. Come on. All right, we'll go second it. Take the properties of the parent element. I'd be a little bit, concerned about using the word element here. That's a little bit on the generic side. It is going to be very specifically a parent class, so you got the class of animal, where every animal has a name and a species and some other things. And then a subclass from that could be a class dog that also has a name and like a weight, a number of legs, something like that. But it also has doggy features that go along with it. Jessica hits it right on the head there. It takes attributes from the parent. Inherent is very important. So using extends kind of gets to the heart of making object-oriented, using an object-oriented programming style, right? Where you have kind of like hierarchies of things, and you can always have a base idea of a thing. Something is an object, something is an animal, a mineral, or a place. Is specifically a place in the United States. It's specifically a room inside of a building, and on down. With all of those subclasses, those little leaf classes, inheriting the things that bring them together in the higher level, the parent class. Inheriting code from a parent object. So once again, we're going to be careful. It's not so much a parent object, it's a parent class that we're inheriting things from. Inherit attributes and methods, very good. Inherit the capabilities of a parent. I like that word. I think that kind of, it's a good real real world way of looking at what it is that a subclass does. A class always has certain things that it can do, capabilities, ways that it interacts with the world. So subclasses take on a lot of those capabilities. If you are confused about classes and inheritance and stuff like that, feel free to come to office hours. I'd love to be able to go through just like a little review demo type thing for once people run out of questions. So feel free to come, lurk, and if nothing else, we'll go over a little bit of class stuff in office hours today. Very good answers all the way around. So let's dig more into our class-based component. In this case, our parent component is React component. And so this is a class that was made by the Facebook team that gave us the ability to render things to the screen, to work with state, to work with props, all of that good stuff. And once we have a base class that extends component, now we have the ability to do all of these other, component-based stuff that we did here using hooks and things directly inside of this class. So let's go into the first thing that we need. Every class-based component has a render function. And inside of that render function, we can return any JSX we want. So I'm going to say div, hello, Warren. Okay, got it. And in fact, let me just go ahead and make it exactly the same as what we had before. I'm going to say hello. So we got some room to breathe and room to grow. Boom, boom. All right. So once again, same thing as what we did before, but now instead of returning something directly through our functional component, we're returning it inside of this render function. which is nice. It's very precise. We know exactly what this function does and what happens with whatever is returned out of it. Once again, let's start making this dynamic. So inside of my render function, I'm going to say name Warren, and I'm going to inject that into our DOM. There we go. Now, one thing that you'll notice is while this is very similar to what we did with our functional components, if I wanted to give this function access to this variable, I have to put it inside of our render function. If I was to put this, for instance, out here, it's not going to work, right? This space in our code is not really, it's not a code that's going to be compiled. This is just defining things that are attached to our class. And so it doesn't make sense to put in code that's going to be compiled here. It has to actually be inside of our function. Okay, good thing to keep in mind. It's a mistake that likely you'll make at some point. Always make sure that the compiled code is inside of a functional area, that it's not inside of this like definitional area, you could say. So this is nice. We are injecting in a new variable, but it would be even better if this was state. So let's define some state inside of class-based component. In order to do that, we need to make a constructor. Constructors are a feature of, potentially at least a feature of every class-based component, every class. Constructor basically just gives us the ability to run a certain pieces of code before we actually start our render and do the other things that are associated with our class. In the case of class-based components, there's only two things that you're really going to do in here. One of the things is that you're going to call super. And what super allows for this component to do is just to make sure that the constructor for React components is run. So it makes sure that that connection is made between this class and our parent class. You don't have to have the constructor here. If we were to take that out, then super is called by default. But if we are explicitly creating a constructor, then we do have to call super manually to make sure that all of those connections are put. Thankfully, there isn't a whole lot that we need to do inside of here. From here now, we can just go ahead and create our state. So we do that by saying this.state is equal to, let's say name, Warren, and I'm also going to say age, 3. Okay. So notice how we define this. In this case, our state is attached to this particular instance, this particular object that is created using this class. And so, every instance of this component is going to have its own state inside of it, right? So we have to access it through this. That's a big change from when we were using our hooks, where we basically could just get the state directly. In this case, our state is always bound inside of the instance object of our class. So same here, if I actually want to access that, I have to say this.state.name. And here I'm going to say age is this.state.age. There we go. Same exact thing, same exact, like overlapping with our functional components here. And in this case, the only difference is that we're accessing it through this. Okay, so going back to our slides, we got those first two things that are done. Let's go ahead and get event handling into this. So same thing, in our DOM, it's not going to change. We still need something that's going to trigger our event. So I'm going to say change the state here. Still need an event listener. So I'm going to say on click for our event listener. And I'm once again going to just make an anonymous function for this. When you are working with a class-based component and you need to change state, number one, notice that all of the slices of state are all in one thing. It's all going to be bound inside of this one state object. Unlike with our hooks, where you could have separate slices of state that are handled separately. So there's one command that allows you to change state, and that is this dot set state. What set state gets is an object. And inside of this object, we are going to just put in whatever piece of the state is going to change. So in this case, I can say name Allison. Go ahead and click my button and change this to Allison, just like we think. I can also put age. There we go. So once again, important thing to keep in mind is that we use set state and then we access it through our instance. We access it through this. Once again, if you have any questions, put it on Slido, but also feel free to shout it out. Here we go. So right now, once again, I'm using that anonymous function in order to get this in, but it's always nice and clean to be able to access this through a handler. So I'm going to say handle click. And up here, I'm going to attach handle click to our class, as opposed to, I defined it as a const inside of our functional component. This is going to be just like a custom method that's on this class. So in order to do that, I'm going to say handle click. That's going to be equal to a function. And inside of there, I'm just going to put in the code that allows me to set my state right there. All right, and we break. It actually did not work. If I look inside of this, it says handle click is not defined in app2 on line 22. It says that it doesn't know what to do with this. Can someone tell me why it might not be able to find this function?
Is it because it's an arrow function?
Say that one more time.
Because arrow functions don't work with classes. Is that what it is?
You're getting there. Anybody else have a stab at it?
Isn't it?
It's not inside the render.
Yeah, so we're not defining it inside of the render. That's absolutely true. But where is it? Like if we are attaching it to our class, how would we access handle click?
You're missing this keyword.
That's right, yeah. So what we do is we use this, right? And that's because, once again, we are defining this as a part of our class. Just like state is kind of like something that's bound up inside of our class. So we need to use this in order to access it. So now it works. So another key difference, anytime that you create some kind of custom method that's attached to our component, you have to use this in order to access it. Same thing with state. And as we'll see in a second, same thing with props. A little bit of a side note, I would say, like a good 3-4 years back, another thing that you would do in your constructor is make it so that you would bind these events to our component. That's something you kind of have to do by hand. And I almost don't even remember how this was done. It's something like handle click dot bind this. So this would actually make it so that handle click was attached to this. And it was a really cumbersome, useless, like not very fun additional piece of code that people used to have to do. Fortunately, now React has kind of evolved beyond that, so that as long as you're defining your methods like this, where it's equal to an arrow function, it's equal to an anonymous function, it'll automatically bind it to your component. So you might see like a question in your check for understandings about binding methods to your component. It's something that's good to know that it exists, but it's not something that you need to do anymore. So I would say, ingest that and then just put it out of your mind as quickly as possible. It's an unneeded complication. As long as you define it like this, you can always access your custom methods through this. Righty, so we have managed event handling. Let's go ahead and do our component nesting. So same as before, I'm going to make a little div for this, and we're going to have another statement say H3. Let's say this, that's state.name, the fine name for a this.state.age, year old. Okay. So it works just fine, updates the way that we expect it to. This is getting cumbersome. Let's make a new component. So I'm going to say, once again, I'm going to make a person component and take all this. Now, just because this is a class-based component doesn't mean that it can't access a functional component. And very often for something that's a little bit more lightweight, like what person does, you'll see these as functional components. So I can say right up here, const person is equal to anonymous function, going to return this stuff. All right. Once again, let's just get props coming in here. And this is now accessed through props. This is accessed through props. This is accessed through props. This is accessed through props. Cool deal. So it's looking for props. Nothing is in it yet. We actually have to pass those in. And yeah, and the same thing with passing props. It doesn't matter if person is a class-based component or a functional component. You're still going to pass in props the same way. So I can just say name, age. And of course, this is inside of our state. So that's this state.name, this state.age. Good to go. So yeah, it does not, it doesn't matter if it's a class-based component from kind of like from this level of looking at it. That said, let's go ahead and make a class-based component for this. And that'll also illustrate a little point. So I'm going to say class person extends React component. And we're going to return. Oops. So anytime that we make a class-based component, we have that render function. And inside of that render function, that render method, I'm going to return my DOM. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. We see that we have an issue. It said that props is not defined. And the reason for that, can anyone just hazard a guess as to why props is not defined in this case?
You're not passing it in?
No, we are passing it in. I'm passing it in right here. It just doesn't live here, right? And so it's not a matter of like putting props.
Right, yeah, that's what, I guess, that's what I was thinking, but maybe not.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, follow the thought. What do you think?
I guess I was thinking what you just did, type it into like,
No.
yeah, I guess
Totally.
not though.
Yep, not in this case, right? And so that's a methodology that's just for a functional component. In the case of a class-based component, so props is just something that's kind of defined inside of our parent. So just like with state, just like with render.
You deconstruct it here?
Deconstruct from where?
Destructure it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, destructure from where? Like when am I destructuring?
On the inside the render function?
Yeah, I mean, these are good guesses, but in order to destructure it, I still have to have something I'm destructuring from. Like, we don't have access to props. It doesn't know where props is here. So I'm gonna go ahead and go ahead.
I was just gonna say, do you need to like put constructor on it in super?
No, we don't have to do that. So once again, the only time that we need to use a constructor is if we're creating state. And in this case, there's no state inside of this component.
Does class take the props, the class person?
Yeah, I would say that's true. The class is what's getting the props. So that's getting very close to the answer.
So do you change the props to person?
No, we don't change the
person.
No, I mean The inside the curly bracket, change the props to person, not change the, yes.
Like person? That's a good guess. Because ultimately props is wrapped up inside of our class. I'm gonna go ahead and give us the answer because we still got more to go through. Props is connected to this. Props is something that is built into the class through our React component. It's a feature of this class. So anytime that you pass props in, you can access them anywhere inside of this component, but you have to access them through this.props. It's kind of bound together in the background, you can say. There we go. So now it works. Okay. And yeah, that's it. So that's our 5. So, you know, key things, key takeaways here is when you're using class-based components, the component itself is a class. So you're going to define it as a class. It's going to extend React components. Whenever you want to render something, you use the render function. If you want to create state, and only if you want to create state, then you have to define that inside of the constructor. And you know, it's annoying, but you also have to put super in there. If you're making event handlers, you're connecting those to the class, you're accessing that through this. If you do have state, you're accessing that through this. If you have props, you're accessing that through this. Those are the key differences. Functionally, everything works exactly the same as a functional component. But you know, where things are located is really the biggest change. Okay. You know, keep this project on as reference, because this is a good way of being able to kind of like go back and see a model of how class-based components are built in a really simple way. So if you find yourself kind of like, you know, you can't figure out what's going on, or you miss a this somewhere or stuff like that, then you know, you can always go back to this component. So that's that. I'm going to give you all another 5 minutes, look at Slido to see if we have any questions, and then we'll go into the final walkthrough.
It's so fun. It's so fun.
No.
Sorry, I was trying to turn my video off, not unmute.
It's all good. It happens. It's 2021. On. Go ahead and turn off the music here. For those that are interested, this is the soundtrack for The Social Network. It's like Trent Reznor's big kind of like breakthrough soundtrack there. It's great music to code too. All right, okay, we got a couple of questions coming in here. So let's just go ahead and churn through these real quick. First off, am I teaching the entire unit? Yes, I'm going to be going from top to bottom this time around. As you know, there's been some restructuring in, you know, in Lambda in general. And so one of the byproducts of that is that Unit 3 is mine. So yeah, looking forward to being able to jive with y'all all month long. Why would you want state to only be accessible within the component? This is an interesting question. So really, anytime you're making a React component, state is going to be local just to that component. The idea of a component state is that it is something that is ultimately compartmentalized inside of one component. It's a little piece of memory that only exists for that one component. Now you can still share that state with other components using prop drilling, and you can modify that state in other components by prop drilling a method that will eventually like change the state backup line. We're going to be going over that in our next example. But yeah, I mean, like the state itself is always going to be attached to one component. You ever extend an established class rather than a React component? Absolutely. Extend it's about object-oriented programming. It's not a React thing. It's something that is an object-oriented thing. And once again, if y'all are interested in that, you can come to office hours and we'll dig into a little bit more about how classes work and how extend works. Is it possible to create a component with both class and functional based approaches? Which should you take? Oh, if it's possible, got you. If you're starting a project completely from scratch, you're just trying to make something, that's quick and dirty, I would say just go ahead and use functional components because it's fast and easy. At this point, I would say class-based, you're only really going to use class-based components if you're working with a project that already uses them. And that's the primary reason why we're kind of showing it. There is a little bit more detail in the way that class-based components handle lifecycle functions. So triggering code, like when an application first starts or when props change or state changes, stuff like that. And so that's definitely good to know. That may be a reason why you want to default to using a class-based component. But more times than not, at this point, if you're building something new, use functional components. This prop's name is equal to prop's name. That's true. I'm wondering, is the props the only keyword that class will recognize when doing props dot? When doing this dot props name. I think I'm understanding this right. Yeah, so this dot props is always going to be, there's always going to be different slices of state inside of it. So in this case, we have name and we have age. But you're always going to access that through this dot props first. Then you're going to do dot to be able to get inside of it. But these two things look pretty much the same. I guess that's answering the question. Is that answering the question, Mark?
Yes, just missing the S. I was wondering, like.
Oh, got you. Yeah, you always have to have props. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fixed name. Yep, and the same thing with states. State. If you put in states, it's not going to know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Cool deal. We got one more. When changing state, why aren't we doing stuff like set name? Yeah. So this is also something that has been changed in just like more recent versions of React. Previously, I would say like a good 3 years or so, you would have to spread that original state. And you're going to be running into the syntax again of just making sure that everything that's already in the state stays the same. So yeah, this is something that is no longer necessary. Now set state is just smart enough that if you put only one thing or two things inside of it, it's automatically going to keep the rest of the state the same. But it's good to know that that this is what's happening in the background, right? That all of the stuff that's previously inside of state is assigned in there first, and then you're overriding it with whatever you're going to change. The only difference is that now this part happens automatically in the background. And that's a relatively new feature. Also a good question, Kyle Lee. I combined those two things together. Cool. So with that, let's go into our more complex example for the day. If y'all could just go into the follow along folder. And I'm going to see if I can get our our result code here. You can see what it is that we're building towards. So as usual, we got some base code, and we're just going to build three pretty important features into this thing. So this is a shopping list. The whole idea is that, as you go through and you figure out things that you need to add to your shopping list, you can add them in through add. Once you're inside of the store, as you start to buy different things, you can click and knock those off of the shopping list. So it's like, we got bananas, we got milk, we found our pizza sauce. And once we want to remove the things that we've already gotten, that we've already purchased, hit clear purchased and it'll remove it. That's the whole thing. So that's what we're going to build. This is also going to be very similar to your projects, your module projects for the day. But as a start, I'm going to do an npm start on our student-facing code here. Here we go. We got all the stuff, but you notice I can't click on anything, can't add anything, can't clear anything. So we're going to build each of those features in one by one. Okay. So first, let's do a little tour of our code. You know, as usual, everything always starts at index.js. So we have our app component that we rendered. We just made it right inside of this, this file in this case. We have our base data, all of those initial groceries that are already in place. And we have two different subcomponents here. We have list form. And if we look inside of our application, always good to be able to, you know, visually figure out what it is that, you know, we're looking at in our code. So we got our header item here. So that's our header item. We got our list form, which is this entire little block of code here. Then we got our grocery list that have all of our groceries printed out. We're passing in our groceries through props and a button for clear purchases. So we look inside. Here we go. So we have, you know, the beginnings at least of our list form. Very nice. And it has all of our form elements. We're going to build that out in a second. And then we have our grocery list itself. So it takes those props, maps through them, finds every grocery inside, and then it returns an item component that is basically just the name and then the little button that goes along with it. If we look at our item component itself, then we see we already have a little bit of functionality here. You know, we have a class called purchased, where if we look at our CSS, it basically makes it so that we can cross out this name and also change the color of our button. And then we can print this out. So we can actually test that. If I go back inside of my index.js file and I put in true here, and we see that now bananas is crossed out. And put in true here. And we see that milk is crossed out. Right? Why is that? Because when we're inside of grocery items, we're looping through. When we get to the item that has bananas, it passes that item specifically into item. It checks to see if that item specifically is purchased or not. So if it's true that it's purchased, it puts that purchased class on it and applies our style. Same thing for milk. Tortillas is false for purchased, so it puts in just an empty string for that class and leaves it alone. So already we have a little bit of a hint of how we can go about at least doing that first feature of toggling. So yeah, let's dig into that feature. Let's dig into that feature first. So first off, I need to modify my groceries. Right now, I'm just using a static variable, and I'm passing that into groceries list. So what do I need to do to make it so that I can modify my groceries list?
Set up state in a constructor function.
That is correct. Absolutely. So I'm going to make a constructor. All right. As usual, I need to do a super here.
Didn't get that. Could you try?
Oh, Siri was hijacking me for a second. This.state. And inside of this, I'm going to get groceries. And inside of groceries, I'm going to put this base data. And, you know, eventually this might be getting us from a separate file or from an API call. But for now, let's just go ahead and just put it right in, got groceries. Okay. So how does this change? Now, right now, it's still connected to my static. How would I make it so it's connected to my state?
Would you do this stat state dot groceries?
That's correct. I'll catch it on quick. Beautiful. Notice it still took my true or false purchases along with it. So I'm just gonna take those out. Beautiful. All right, so as a start, let's go ahead and add in the toggle ability of my individual items. So, general rule of thumb, I'm actually gonna go back inside of my slides for this. So we're going to be adding a feature to already existing code. This is something you're going to be doing a lot in this unit, something you're going to be doing a lot on the job, and it's easy to get a little overwhelmed. So general rules of thumb when adding in a feature. The first thing you want to do is to set up just the base of the interaction, or even locate the base of the interaction. What is the user doing to kick off this entire thing? And so in the case of this, we want to make it so that a user can click on this and it'll eventually change the value inside of groceries. So what's the base interaction? What's the start of our interaction for this feature?
Add an event.
Repeat that, I'm sorry.
Add an event.
Add an event. I'm not sure. Yeah, what you
Add
mean.
an event.
Add an event. Yeah, that's what we're doing in code. What's the user action?
A click.
It's a click, right? It's a click very specifically to one of these items. So what component are we going to add code for detecting a click in order to get that going?
The item in grocerylist.js.
That's right. So the start, the absolute start is inside of item. That's the beginning of our interaction. So it's really the first place that we start to build code. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, I'm not going to do everything at once. I'm just going to make sure that we can detect a click so that it starts to go towards what I want to happen. I'm going to say one click, and I'm going to make a handle click function here. You notice that this is a functional component. That's completely fine. We can mix and match. And I'm just going to console log out. I'm going to say clicked props dot item dot name. So now when I click on this, there we go. I click on it and it gives me the name of the thing that I'm clicking on. So it's a good first step. All right, let's see what else we need to do. We need to pass any data needed to the place where the application state is held. And so in this case, our application state is inside of our index.js. So we need a way to be able to access and change stuff that's inside of our groceries from our item in our item.js file. In order to get started on this process, I'm just going to do this real quick. So I'm going to make a temporary item. I'm going to say item is equal to, I'll put in state here, do state. And I'm going to just make a quick and dirty like state just inside of this component, just so we can illustrate how we're going to implement this thing. So I'm going to say item, set item is equal to use state. And initially what this will be is a name, an ID, and if it's purchased. So those are the three different things that are inside the state just for this item. We're going to hijack the item that we did pass in through props. So instead of getting the item from props, I'm just going to get the item that is within my, that I defined inside of my local state. Okay. We're going to take this out eventually. This is just for demonstration purposes. Cool deal. So now, this is exactly what we'd expect. It's still going through each of our different items inside of the grocery list. But now I've just kind of created a temporary item to be on the place of it. And this is so that we don't necessarily need to access our state values initially. We can test out how to build this thing just inside of this component. So if I was to click on these, still works. So what I ultimately want to do is every time I click on this, I need to flip the value of purchased. So just within this component, with what we have right here, how would I do that? I need to set this piece of state purchased. It's false right now. I need to set it equal to true.
Would you use the exclamation mark before
I
it?
would use the exclamation mark eventually. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
You do this dot state dot purchased equals the thing.
You're definitely very close. So in this case, go ahead.
You just do set item and do the curly braces for object and triple dot for item.
Yep, we can spread item in this case. We
And
might not
then
need
just
that.
do purchase.
Purchased.
Ternary
and
operator.
And what's purchased equal to?
To purchase, no, it's like, I don't know, exclamation mark.
Yeah, exclamation point. Yeah.
Yes, and purchase.
Yep, we have to make sure that it gets it through item. So I'm just going to say item purchased.
Okay.
Very good, very close. Yeah, as a start, let's say I'm just going to make this equal to true. You don't have to have the complete final answer initially. And so we see that it's working, right? I click on it, it sets purchased equal to true. I can't reset it. I can't, I can't toggle, but I can just make it so that purchased is equal to true. So that gets us half the way there. Then as you said, if I want to toggle between those two states, I can either do if item purchased is equal to true, then purchased is false, otherwise it's true. This will also, this is basically what that exclamation point does, right? A little bit more verbose, but it's but it gets the point across. You can use an if statement for this if you wanted to, also verbose, but it helps you to understand it. We don't necessarily have to say equal to true. That's another way that this starts to get more efficient. You can just say if item purchased is true, it's kind of implicit. Last thing that we can do is just say that we're going to do a not. We're putting an exclamation point in front of purchased. So what this really means is item purchased is not purchased. So a not of a true is a false, a not of a false is a true. And there we go. So this is very nice. This starts to, get us on the road. Of course, right now we're working on the state that just exists inside of this component. What I actually want to do is to do a variation of this code inside of my my app component, because as was mentioned in Jessica's question, ultimately this is the only component that has access to the state directly. If we want to use values of the state, then we have to pass it down through props. If we want to change values of the state, then we have to execute a function that we pass down through props. Very, very important. So what we want to do is have some variation of this code happening up here on this application. So what I'm going to do, I'm back inside of index.js here. I'm going to make a new method. I'm going to call that toggle item. And inside of this, I'm going to get an ID. In the case of this, we were always working with the same component, right? But in this case, we're going to need to find out exactly which grocery item we're working with. So we need to be able to pass that item back up. Okay. The next thing that I need to do is, assuming that I'm getting that item. Yeah, in fact, let's actually do this. I'm just going to say that we're going to console log out our item here. And I'm going to take this method. I'm going to pass that into groceries list. So this .toggle item. And I'm going to get that from my props and groceries list, and I'm going to pass it down into item. So inside of every single item, I'm going to say toggle item props dot toggle item. And what we're going to do here in handle click is instead of setting our state inside here, because the state ultimately doesn't really exist. This is not the the internal state that we want to use. I am going to say props dot toggle item, and I'm going to pass into this item dot ID. And I'm going to get rid of this setting of a state that does not exist. In fact, yeah, we'll just comment it out. Just so have that for reference. Cool. So now what happens? We are passing down this method into groceries list and also into item. This exists inside of our props. When we click on this on this component, it's going to execute this function. It's going to take the current ID of whatever component we're working with, and it's going to pass that ID back up. We're basically going to do a jump from this reference to our method that was passed down through props to the definition of it, and it'll print out our ID. So let's see if it works. Great, let's see what I did wrong here. Yeah, so we have to put that back to props, right? We are no longer using our internal state. So I'm gonna put that back, gonna put that back, gonna put that back. There we go. So now I click on this and yep, we get the ID just for that particular item. Lovely. So that's a start. We have our item, we have our ID. From that ID, where we can find which of these pieces of our grocery list is actually going to be modified. And then from there, we can say, all right, so for this particular item, like if we're searching for 1, 2, 3, we can take that purchased and we can flip it, we can toggle it. Make sure that's passed back into our state, we re-render, and it should bring our new purchased value along for the ride. There's a lot of different ways that we can potentially do this. We will be having to set state regardless. So first thing we're going to do is say we're going to set state. It's going to get a object. What piece of state are we going to be modifying? What slice of state are we modifying here?
The purchased attribute.
Ultimately, yeah. Where's purchased? Where is purchased located?
In groceries.
It's in groceries ultimately, right? Groceries is a list of items. We want to get one item that's associated with this ID. We're going to flip that purchased. So the first thing we have to do is we're going to set state on groceries. That's the thing that's ultimately going to change. Okay. Now with the setting of the state here and setting of the state, our functional components using hooks and everything else, we always have to make sure that we make a copy of that original slice of state. It has to be the same structure, and just with that one little change that we want to make. So there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. In fact, just to make that a little bit easier, I'm going to make a new variable called new groceries here. And once again, I want to make a copy of groceries with that one purchased item change. So the way that I'm going to do that is by saying this.state.groceries.map. So we're going to go through each of the different groceries. And I'm going to add some logic in here. I'm going to say if item.id is equal to our ID. So if, in going through each of our groceries, we found the grocery that matches the one that we passed in, that matches the one that we clicked on, right? Then this is the one where I actually want to change that groceries item. So for this, what I'm going to do is going to return I want all the rest of groceries to stay the same. Only thing that I want to change is purchased. So how would I make it so that I'm going to return a copy of an individual groceries item?
Spread it.
I'm gonna spread it, right? So in this case, that item is item here. So I'm going to spread my item. Only thing that's changing is purchased. And what is purchased going to be equal to? Someone who hasn't spoken yet.
Can you exclamation point purchased?
Is it just purchased? Which purchased are we talking about?
Or I
Item
guess
not purchased.
That's right, item that purchased. There we go. So this will make it so that we'll loop through all of our items. We'll find the item that we're talking about. We flip purchased. Else, we're just going to return item. We leave it alone. We only change the thing that we need to change. And then from there, this will give us a list of all of our groceries with just that one purchased item changed. I'll put that inside of new groceries. And this should give us what we're looking for. So let's test it first and then we'll walk through. There we go, it worked. It's like magic. Cool deal. A lot of stuff that's in here. Big takeaway is that number one, if we're setting the state in a, if our state is located in kind of like our parent component, it's like our application state. That's something you're going to be hearing a lot over the course of this unit. Then we have to make sure that the modifications to that state are in the same place that that state is created. You know, if we had this piece of code inside of item, it wouldn't know what to do with it because it doesn't have access to that state. It only has access to the state here. So what I can do is I can just pass in a method that allows me to change the state from another component. So in this case, I'm clicking on this item. I can send up an ID. I send it back into the space that has that is actually modifying state, and I modify state.
Wait, so I have a question.
Go for it.
It doesn't matter where you create the state, but the modifier for the state has to be on the same file as the state that it was being declared, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is the only, it's only, this state was defined inside of this component. So it needs to also, it can only be modified in this component as well. It is local to this component.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a, you know, this is a tricky thing. And so it's okay if you don't get it, you know, immediately. Big thing is like, if you want to modify a part of state, then you pass down a function. If you want to display a piece of state, then you pass down a variable. You pass, you know, they're both using through props, but you kind of have, you know, like data props and you have like functional props and used for two different kinds of purposes. There we go. So that's our first thing. If you didn't get that, that's okay. We're going to go through two more features. We're probably going to go a little bit over time today, but that's okay. It won't be too much. And all of the stuff that we're doing here, you're going to be doing for your projects today. So you have plenty of time to practice and to step through. So let's do add next, right? For add, what we need to do is make it so we can type stuff in. We click our add button. It takes it and then it adds it to our groceries list here, our groceries state here. So once again, what's the beginning of our interaction? The beginning of it is inside of our list form. The first thing that we need to do ultimately is make it so that the user can type something in here. And so if we are to do that, we need some place where we can capture what the user types in. And so can somebody tell me what we need in order to capture what the user types in?
We need state.
The constructor.
We need state, right? And we're going to have to hook in those same event listeners that we had before. But notice, we have like two different types of state in this application now. We have what's called our application state. You know, we have kind of like our big overarching state that is plugged into a lot of different components. We have to do a lot of prop drilling to make use of it. And here we have a piece of state that only exists and is only used just within this component. This is going to be a big conceptual idea that you're going to be working with all through this. Of when do you have a state that's just defined quickly and local, and when do you have state that is used in a lot of different places? Trying to do that efficiently is like one of the major problems that you're going to fix inside of this unit. But let's concentrate on the problem that we have. We need to make state. It's a class-based component, so I'll make a constructor here. Do my super. I'll say this, that state is equal to, I'm going to still make it an object. And what's going to be in there is just like input. It's just going to be something that'll hold the value of what we're typing in here. So you've seen this before. We need to make it so that every time the user clicks on, like types into our input, then it's going to set the state of our input. So I'm going to say on change here. Okay. We're using a class-based component, so we have to say this dot handle changes. And we have to update our state. So I'm going to say this dot set state input, and I have to put in whatever the user just typed. So that's E target value. I'm just going to test this as it is. I'm going to say a console log on this dot state dot input. Once again, notice that I'm not trying to build everything at once, taking things one thing at a time. Great approach to have. There we go. So it looks like we're grabbing what the user is typing. We're putting it inside of input. It re-renders, and we get our input value. So get that. Warren ships. Okay, so we're capturing those changes. Now we have to make it so that we'll do something with that input. So for that, I'm going to make another event listener. I'm going to say on submit. So go to this dot handle submit. Same thing here. Handle submit. Okay. Now, once again, what's actually going to happen here, what we need to happen is that we're going to take that input. We're going to get that value that the user typed in, and we need to add it to our groceries here. So once again, we're going to have to make our modifying method and pass that in to our list form. That's what's ultimately going to be executed. So I'm going to go back inside of my index file and just make that. We're going to call this add item. Add item gets a title, let's say. And I'm just going to console log out our title, just to make sure the connection is made. I'm going to add that in as a prop. Make sure I have this there. And so now this is inside of the props for my list form. So I'm going to say this dot props dot add item. And we're going to pass in that value that the user just typed. So that's going to be this dot state dot input. So what should happen here? I should be able to type in stuff. We can take that out in a second. And then I add, I forgot something. So when I tried to add, it ended up just like refreshing my screen. Can somebody tell me what I forgot here?
Prevent default.
That's right. So by default, it just kind of, it reloads the page. So we got to do a prevent default here. Chips. So now should console log out chips. Pizza. Console logs out pizza. Beautiful. Okay, so now I'm inside of my index. As soon as I hit that button, I do that submit. It's going to take that input And now it's in the land of our global state. So now, once again, I am able to set our state, in this case, to add in a value. So I'm going to say groceries. So I'm going to do something slightly different here. Once again, we still, I'll even make it. So we're still going to have a copy of our groceries. We have to do something slightly different this time. What we need to do is to send back an array, same structure, that has all of our current groceries plus a new grocery. So can someone start me along that path? How would I make it so that this returns an array that has all of my older groceries?
I guess you would do the straight brackets and then spread groceries.
That's what I do, right? I mean, I could do that state.groceries. That would give me an exact copy, right? But ultimately, I want to be able to return an array that has all of my current groceries plus another one. So what I'm going to do is wrap that inside of just the definition of an array. And I'm going to spread this. So that takes a copy of all of my old groceries, puts them into a new array that I can add stuff to. So then, so we have all of our old groceries plus a new one. And just for the sake of cleanliness, I'm going to say new grocery here, or new item. Looking back at our definition, we see all the things that make up an individual grocery. It has a name, it has an ID, and it has a purchased field. So this will also need to have a name. We'll need to have an ID, and it'll need to have a purchased field. Important thing with IDs is that they should be unique as much as possible. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about making an ID. We'll be going over more of them later on. A quick and dirty way is just to make it the length of our list. Right, so every time we add on a new one, it's 5, then it's 6, then it's 7, then it's 8, then it's 9. Purchased in this case, so this is the default value of purchased when we first add something to our grocery list. So what should this be?
False.
Should be false, right? We have not purchased it if we just put it inside of our list. And the title of this item, the name of this item, ultimately should be what we passed in. So I'm going to call that title. That is what gets added to our new groceries list. And we set our state so that instead of groceries, now we have all of our groceries plus 1. So let's see if it works. Yep, we might have missed something. Not read property length. This. Well, can somebody tell me what I did wrong here?
You forgot the state.
Forgot the state, exactly. That's good. I meant to do that just so that y'all could figure that out. There we go. Chips. Salsa. Other thing. So there it is. That's the whole thing. Now, of course, we could clean this up a little bit. Instead of having my new groceries list, I could put this directly into my definition. That starts to make it a little bit cleaner. Same thing for my new item. I could take this whole thing and I can put it directly inside. At this point, this starts to look a little messy to me, so I don't mind having new item instead. Cleanliness is next to godliness when you're working in the code. There we go. One more feature and we'll be all done, and that is our cleared purchased feature, right? And so once again, same thing, same basic process, right? This is the place where we do all the modifications to our component, and then we have to identify the place where the interaction starts. So in this case, our interaction starts when we hit that clear purchase button. If I look inside of my components, I see that that clear purchase button is inside of my grocery list. So I'm going to say on click here. Is handle click. We are using a functional component, so I can just go ahead and say const handle click. And I'm just going to do a console log just to make sure that the connection is there. Always good to test, always good to break these things down. All right, so it's working. What ultimately I need to do is to access, is to change my state inside of my application function, right? So I'm gonna make a new handler. I'm going to call this clear purchased. Okay. In this case, I don't actually have to pass anything in. You know, I'm working with my groceries as they are. I'm not changing anything that requires outside data. All I need to do is basically replace groceries with a version of groceries where everywhere where purchased is equal to true, it's removed, right? And so in order to do that, we're going to use another function that returns an array, and that is filter. So I'm going to say this dot set state groceries. And yes, let's do the same thing we were doing before. I'm going to say new groceries, const new groceries. And we're going to say this dot state dot groceries. I'm going to use a filter on this. Yeah, I'm going to just put it up on Slack real quick. And, you know, like once again, if you only have a vague sense, that's okay. This is just as much to get an understanding of what people understand at this point. But what does array dot filter? Let's say we got item is equal to something. Do. In your own words, what does filter do? Okay, we got 1. And I'm only going to wait for 5 because we are already over time. But yeah, put in your answers. If we get over 5 within the next minute or two, I will be very happy. I'll hold it in my heart forever. 4, 5. Okay, well, we'll get 6. We can get at least 1 more. Because filter is not, you know, it's not the most intuitive thing in the world when you first look at it. This is also something that we can go over in office hours if people are still confused. Returns an array of objects that pass your argument. I like that, right? So inside of our filter, we're going to return some kind of conditional. If that conditional is true, then our item stays. If it's false, then our item goes. So yeah, Boolean test returns an item each iteration if the condition is met. Returns an array of items given a certain configuration. That's all good. So let's fill out our filter here. I'm going to get an item. And I'm going to do this in the more verbose way. I'm going to return. So in this case, what do we want? What would make an item stay? When do we want an item to still be inside of our list?
If purchased is false.
Purchase is false, right? So in this case, we want if item that purchased is equal to false is probably the easiest way to understand this. If purchase is equal to false, then that means that this entire thing flags as true and we keep it. If purchase is equal to true, then that means that we've already clicked on that item. So that makes this whole thing flag to false, and it gets removed. So this should give us what we're looking for. All right, so we have our thing. Be good to test this, but we can test that directly through. This is the function that changes our state. So I'm going to pass that into our grocery list, just so we can trigger it. Boom. And we're going to execute that. So I'm going to say props, clear. Purchased. Okay. Don't have to pass anything in. It's working with the data that we already have. I have a feeling that there's something wrong here. Clear purchase is not defined. Clear purchased. Clear purchased. Ah, and once again, this strikes again. We are using a class-based component, so this method is connected to our instance. Okay. So turn a couple of these off, clear purchased, and it's gone. That's all there is to it. Put in chips, put in pizza, put in cheese. And it's gone. And that's it. That's all there is to it. Obviously, the things that we said about class-based components hold, but this part of the lesson is about a little bit more than that. This is our first step into understanding, number one, the separation between an application state and local state. And we're gonna be digging into that idea a lot more. So if it's not completely clear, that's okay. And also, if we are using state, just the way that we start to access things that are inside of our parent. So in this case, if we want to display the stuff in our state, we pass that down through props. If we want to modify things in state, then we create those functions right inside of the same component where they have easy access. We pass those down into our subcomponents and we execute them in order to make that change. All right, cool. Let's see if we have any questions. No questions yet. That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, if you do have any questions, feel free to add them. In the meantime, yeah, if you have any questions right now, feel free to shout it out. Does anybody have anything that's coming to mind?
Yeah, real quick, can you go back over to list form and can I just take another look at your handle submit? I got something wrong there. Okay, sweet, thank you.
Gotcha. What did you do wrong?
You were just moving a little bit fast, and so I just didn't catch something. And I could use the script, but it was just like one line that I missed.
No, totally. Good for you. Yep, and like as always, this is going to be posted to the Slack channel after we're done. Another thing that I always do is there's kind of like a wrap-up post that has all the information and like some additional resources for just like ideas that are inside of this class. So there's lots of articles that are going to be inside of there. Feel free to go through those at your leisure. Let's look at your projects for the day. So we're throwing you right in the deep end. You're going to be building an application from scratch today. That is a basic to-do. It's going to have all of the same features as our follow along. So, you're going to be able to add in a to-do. You're going to be able to select individual items and cross them off your list once it's clear that that to-do is over. Right? And then you can clear in order to take out those values. As a start, stick with very simple styles, but you're free to continue those styles as much as you want. This is the basic structure of your state. Like once again, it's going to be an array of objects. And inside of those objects, you're going to have a task, an ID, and completed. It's going to work very, very similarly to this follow along. So, don't hesitate to kind of, at least, don't copy the code directly, but use it as a reference in order to see how things start to work. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay. So hopefully this was informative. It's definitely the first step. Come to office hours and we'll be there for you. Thank you, Devin. And yeah, I'll see you later on today. Checking the help channels. Take care and talk to you soon.